I've recently come to a conclusion, and that is that I agree that there is a war on Christmas. It's just not the same war on Christmas that you're going to hear about on talk radio. The war on Christmas for me is the war on the original Christmas, the one that takes a radical Middle Eastern prophet and domesticates him, makes him sugary and sweet and safe, and focuses for a long time on what it would look like if that prophet were just fixed in the form of a cute little baby. Often, that baby that gets portrayed to us, at least here in the States, is white, weirdly enough. A cute little white baby. How far from the message of the radical teacher and prophet who's hidden inside the scriptures that if people read them, they might experience? For me, the war on Christmas is to take a wild and undomesticated teacher and make him safe and sugary and palatable for the modern God of consumption. Here's one story, one of my favorite stories of the teacher Jesus. When I was a kid, I thought it was just amazing, like a scene out of a movie, and I didn't really understand its meaning until I got to study with people who really knew those texts. Maybe some of you will remember this scene when Jesus and some of his friends get out of a boat on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, and they're approached by a man who's been living in a graveyard. He's shackled with chains, and he's wild. He's speaking in tongues and hearing voices, and he says to the teacher Jesus, "Don't mess with me, whatever you do." Jesus takes the demons out of the man and puts them into a herd of wild pigs and runs them off the side of a mountain. Do you remember that story? As a kid, it's amazing. It's like something out of a movie. But it's so much more than that. Do any of you remember what the name of the demon is? Legion. And this is really important. So, Jesus or Jesus' friends or the people who wrote down the story 30 to 40 years after Jesus' death tell the story in this way. The name Legion was what you think it is, a legion of soldiers, made up of thousands of people who made sure that the territories that they occupied in the Roman Empire stayed in line. The people whose land they were stealing, the people who they were enslaving and forcing to worship the God of empire, when they got out of line, Legion kept you there. And when he's talking about getting out on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, this was one of the far outposts of the Roman Empire where there were a few legions that everyone would know were just around the corner. It was unsafe to live there if you weren't part of the empire. The 10th legion of the Roman Empire would be the one that would destroy the temple in Jerusalem in the year 65 or 70 of the Common Era. I guarantee you that when Mark wrote this book, he knew that was the legion that did the end of his temple. Just so turns out one of the mascots of that particular legion stationed right there was a pig. And so, when you take a person on whose land empire forces were stationed who couldn't be chained, it says this man couldn't be chained, and you ask him, what evil, unholy force has occupied your body? And he says, Legion. The audience of the day knew. It would be as if a prophet from indigenous tribes here in the United States had suddenly had a vision that there was a demon called American forces when we were colonizing this land. Or think if a prophet today stood up when radicalized, militarized forces took over a town in response to protest and pointed and said, do you want to see where Legion is taking control? It's them. This is a wild, undomesticated teacher who was willing to point to the forces of violent, militarized empire who consumed other people and said, that's what's evil. It was very political. Or you can have a sweet baby who does not ask you to do all too much. I mean, I have babies and they ask you to do a lot, but it's just safer. It's just safer. Look at the Christmas story itself. I'm not making this up. Every year, we remind you that this is a story about a dark-skinned Palestinian Jewish girl, likely teenaged, unwed, who is poor, living in occupied land, who gives birth to a homeless, dark-skinned Palestinian Jewish rabbi who gives people free health care. He and his family, when he's born, travel across national borders as refugees, and it says without proper documents, to seek safety from a tyrannical ruler. When they get there, the teacher grows up, is likely illiterate, definitely homeless, surrounds himself with blue-collar fishermen and farmers, teaching to illiterate people, saying, do you know what? The kingdom of God is in you as much as it is in Legion, more than it is in Legion. Don't believe the lie that you don't matter. And he is put to death at the hands of the state unjustly. So how do we get from a dark-skinned Palestinian Jewish political radical born to an unwed teenage mother who crosses borders without papers, who becomes a death row inmate, killed because of the desires of religious fundamentalists and weak or corrupt complicit politicians, and turn that into a story that would be wrapped in the God of consumption or empire? He preaches what I would call a theology of kindness. It's a radical economy of grace that says, I don't care how untouchable you are, how unclean you are, how poor you are. I don't care if you're a tax collector who helps fund Legion, or a prostitute, or someone of a different race or faith. You are a child of God. And in his radical immanence, he says, do you see? It's right here. Look. It's like fishing or mustard seeds or forgiving your kid. It's always right in front of you. A theology of kindness, not weak kindness. I don't mean the confusion of a superficial nicety of opening the door or telling someone that that dress looks really good on them when it doesn't. I don't mean that kind of superficial engagement. I mean the kind of seeing that the person in front of you is holy and you will not allow yourself to treat them as less. We live with Legion everywhere right now. Everywhere. But just as Jesus' teachings talk about the kingdom of God being something that I'm responsible for, I think I'm also responsible for Legion's presence in my life. It's not something out there that I can blame on a politician or a party. Legion and unkindness in the most severe ways show up in my life every time I wait to see what I'm going to get from someone before I decide if I treat them with dignity. It's subtle and it's every day. Think about when your meal doesn't come out right at a restaurant. It's a really simple everyday example. Does the person who's working for a few dollars an hour get your kindness? They didn't cook the food. Do the people that did for making a mistake get your kindness? A great way to ask if you're inhabiting a theology of kindness is to say, what's my response to people when they don't provide me with perfection? See, that's a transactional economy, and we are taught to live in a transactional economy. You give me what I want, and I'll give you my value, my depth, my attention, my service. Once you stop being important to me or you don't deliver, then I'll put the pressure on you. It shows up in the most unexpected places. You should really watch out for churches and liberal charities. People who already identify as being kind can be the most unkind when perfection doesn't show up. It's a liberal charity whose members treat service staff or facility staff without kindness in a way that they would never treat the chair of the board or the spokesperson. It shows up in the everyday ways that we wait to see whether the person in front of us is going to give us what we want. It shows up in simple sentences like, you really have to pressure people if you want to get good results. It's steeped into the capitalism and consumerism that makes up our modern American lives. It shows up whether we are as upset that one person dies with the color of their skin, or as upset when another person with a different color skin dies. Legion. Legion. And I think often we confuse kindness with weakness. The Buddhist teacher Sharon Salzberg says that this is a real problem because if you look at movies or books, the popular kid has always got it going for them. They can get things done, and their little sidekick is kind. The superhero is resolute and powerful, can get things done, and has to crack a few eggs to make an omelet, but the sidekick is kind and nice and follows up to clean up the mess. She says that we should abandon the idea that you have to choose between strength and kindness. And that's what I really love about the Christmas narrative and the teachings of Jesus, is that he says the entire world can be broken down. The forces of empire itself, of racism, oppression, of dehumanization, can be taken down with a tenderness that will destroy armies of legion. It's hard to do. It's hard to do when we value our own lives based on what's in our bank account. It's hard to do when national politicians are engaged in campaigns of revenge and meanness. It's hard to do when we value our own country based on its power and might and strength, or GDP. Because we're taught transaction over and over and over again. It takes practice to swim upstream from that. A theology of kindness recognizes that you will die. And no amount of toys or money or success or titles will take that away. You will get sick. You will suffer. And all creatures desire grace and happiness. The Buddhists teach a practice of moving beyond transaction that's called loving kindness meditation. It starts off by simply identifying yourself and then concentric circles moving out and saying, may you be at peace. May you be free from fear. May you be happy. May you be well. After you master the technique of actually wishing those things for yourself, you get to move on to a friend or a benefactor, and then to a neutral person, and then to an enemy, and then to all beings. Sharon Salzberg says that actually it's selfish to do this practice, because once your enemies are well and free from fear and at peace, your life will get better too. That to desire that wellness for them is a good thing. She talks about the freedom that comes from knowing my reaction to you doesn't depend on what I get from you. I get to be free. I get to actually love you by my choice and not what society or our interaction tells me to. Brain studies on people who do loving kindness meditation for weeks show that they have more joy, more peace, less anxiety, less resentment in their lives. That's all good. But for me, stepping outside of transaction to say, I will treat you with dignity no matter what comes out of this, is evidence that the kingdom of God or the beloved community or peace on earth or whatever you call it is indeed possible. And you are one of its builders. It's extremely difficult. And I mess up 3 or 4 times before I leave the house. Every day. Every single day. Sharon Salzberg says that the Buddha taught this practice first as an antidote to fear, which I found interesting. Fear. Because it says, I'm in control of one thing: how I treat you. It doesn't matter if Legion consumes me, I will not allow it to make me consume you. It doesn't matter if Legion consumes others, I will not participate. The one constant in my life is that I know that, like the teacher Jesus saying, there is no unclean person. You cannot stop us, no matter who you are, from treating others with radical dignity and grace. See, the Christmas story, like all good stories, is a present tense story. Christmas didn't happen 2,000 years ago. We are still arguing about who gets to control Jerusalem. We're still arguing about taxes. We're still arguing about whether to build a wall and who belongs. We're still arguing about whether or not your country is great because it implies force, or whether your country is great because it gives grace. This is a present-day story happening with you and me right now. And so as you celebrate and go to parties and meet with friends in the next few weeks, do not forget, this story is the teaching of an oppressed, poor woman of color giving birth to a homeless, illiterate teacher who preaches a love and dignity so radical that his own life would be taken in response. And it's a story of your invitation to build heaven on earth wherever you're at. May you use this story to be kind and just and loving and resist Legion wherever you find it. Amen.